We have a great panel for you this morning. Sitting to my immediate right is Sharon Buccafusco. Sharon has been the Associate Chief Compliance Officer at Tradition Capital Management, and she's also the VP of Client Services in the Private Client Group. Sharon is responsible for the maintenance and ongoing development of effective regulatory compliance policies and procedures. And earlier in her career, she was Vice President at J.P. Morgan Chase, the investment bank. Sitting to Sharon's right is Linda Shirkey. She's the President and founder of the Advisors Resource, where she has provided compliance expertise to registered investment advisors for more than 20 years. Her firm's clients range from startups to multi-billion-dollar entities, hedge fund, private equity, and wealth managers. She's also a former institutional stockbroker covering money managers and major corporations. And rounding out the panel at the end of the table is David Edwards. He's the president and founder of Heron Wealth in New York, which provides financial advice, investment management, and estate planning to individuals and families across the U.S. and in Europe. Prior to founding Heron Wealth, David was associated with Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan, and Nomura Securities, where he developed investment products and quantitative trading models. So the focus of this panel is on smaller advisors and how to make the most of limited resources. You've now listened to enough of this conference and you know enough in your own worlds to know the challenges that smaller advisors face. The Advisors Act regulatory regime is fulsome and growing on a daily basis, and the same rules that apply to large investment advisors also apply to small advisors. Under the Regulatory Flexibility Act, the SEC is supposed to take into account the effect of its rules on smaller advisors, and that makes everybody feel very comfortable until you realize that the SEC defines smaller advisors as anyone with less than 25 million AUM, which you might question because the NSMIA threshold for registering with the SEC is now 100 million. So effectively, there is a SOP given to the smaller advisors, but it's practically meaningless. The Investment Advisor Association actually is at the forefront of efforts to get the SEC to redefine what it means as smaller advisors and to use potentially a test that relies on the number of employees instead of just assets under management. So we have a room full of people here, and I'm going to make a guess that you're not here because you have less than 25 million of assets under management. But I will ask for a show of hands of who has 25 or fewer employees in your firm.
Ta-da. Wow.
So you can see that a more realistic, you have self-identified as a smaller advisor, and you'll see that it's the resources you have in the firm, not the AUM that defines it. So we have rapid advances in technology. We have things that you have to worry about today that money managers didn't have to worry about when a lot of the rules were written, like cybersecurity, like social media, like WhatsApp, like the pace of change, the pace of technology. You just heard in the exam panel that the SEC, all the big data they use when they do examinations, and the smaller advisors are constantly trying to run to keep up, while at the same time trying to do what the clients are expecting you to do, which is manage their portfolios. So what we're going to try to do for you here today is give you some practical tips on how you can be flexible, allocate your resources in the best way possible, be adaptable, and maybe think of resources and other things you can use to help you do your jobs that you may not be using now. The slides are in your course materials, and in addition to the slides, there's a longer outline that will discuss some of the topics we're talking about. There are also, thanks to the panel, there are some very practical tips. There's testing, compliance testing calendars, there's risk mapping assessments, there's some compliance procedure samples. So I would commend the materials to you on your own time. We won't exactly be going through the slides item by item because we wanted this to be more iterative. We will be taking questions as we go along, and you can either raise your hand or Paul has passed out some cards. You can write down your question and send them in.
He's wolfing down a bagel right now, so give him time to finish his bagel.
Are you going to say something controversial?
We would never say something controversial. Okay, so why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you here? Obviously, this all derives back to your need to have a good compliance program. You all know the compliance rule 20647. You have to have policies and procedures reasonably designed to prevent violations of the Advisors Act and the federal securities laws. You have to at least annually assess the sufficiency of your procedures and the effectiveness of their implementation. Now, this is a very important rule. It is a principles-based rule. So that's all it says. You have to figure out what to do. You have to figure out, do you do everything in-house? Do you bring in outside resources? What topics do you think present the biggest risk to your firm, and develop procedures in those areas? And there is no one right answer. There is, and I think we heard yesterday from the gentleman who was talking about enforcement, that the SEC looks for reasonableness. So we have different views on the panel. Sharon, can you just briefly describe how you handle or approach compliance at your office?
We're a small firm out of Summit, New Jersey. We have assets under management of about $611 million. And we only have 2 people within the firm who do compliance. But like everybody probably sitting in this room, both of us wear other hats. The Chief Compliance Officer is also the head of our private client group. I happen to also be a VP in the private client group who does the client servicing of those clients. And as we all know, that's how we make our money, is really by the client servicing and the portfolio management. So the 2 of us, as we said, since it is only the 2 of us, we have taken the approach that we employ our entire firm. When any kind of new regulations may come down, and I want to compliment the IAA because they are able to send us out newsletters and very succinctly identify, here are new rules and regulations that have come down. Here is what it means to you as an advisor. It does help us to synthesize and to really focus on what of that applies to our firm and what do we need to do. So we go out to the respective departments in our firm, be it trading, okay, be it client servicing, be it technology, and say to them, here is what the new requirements are. How does this affect your current processes? What policies do we need to put in place? We engage them to help us to either rewrite the policy or develop new policy. We also engage specific people throughout the firm, and it's on a rolling basis to do the testing. We say that there's an annual testing, but we do it throughout the course of the entire year. We find that with limited resources, that makes it just so much easier. You don't feel that you are getting inundated at one time. As it is, you have your ADV that you have to file the first quarter by March 31st. Then you have other deadlines with 13Fs, Form PF, whatever applies to your firm. So those have set deadlines. So therefore, we try to do rolling calendars. Everything we do in-house, with the exception of outsourcing our surprise exams. We do have custody of some of our client accounts, being that we are trustees on the trust. So as required by SEC, we have an outside accountant who comes in and does a surprise exam for us. We also use an outside vendor to archive our emails because that we just couldn't do internally. And then all of our CRM systems, et cetera, are all in the cloud. So therefore we employ that vendor to really give us the securities that we need, the safeguards as far as cybersecurity, et cetera. We file our own ADVs and our own 13Fs. So pretty much in a nutshell, that's how we do it within our firm.
Great. Dave, do you do the same thing or do you do something different?
So I'm the president of an 8-person firm. We take care of 175 families, $360 million in assets. For the first 15 years of my firm, I was the chief compliance officer, the president, and the chief marketing officer. So our meetings were very short. About 5 years ago, I realized that the amount of things I needed to know about compliance was becoming an exponentially increasing task, but the amount of time I had available to deal with that was decreasing. So at that point, I brought in an outside vendor to help us with the compliance role. And when I say that we outsource the compliance task, I don't mean that we outsource the culture of compliance, but we did outsource the process of having someone tell us what needs to be in our compliance regime, review those annual checklists, come in every January for a few days for a year-end review, and then for a deep dive in August on the ADV, on our trading records, on everything that we do. And that has become a very powerful partnership, so it's no longer an overwhelming task, and I don't feel like something has fallen through the cracks.
So do they do all the testing for you, or do you do additional testing during the year?
So the question is, do they do all the testing? They do a deep dive on testing, but like Sharon's firm, we do compliance continuously throughout the year. Mm-hmm. If you try and chunk it all up in January, when you're trying to do annual reviews for clients at the same time, it's going to fall through the cracks. If you let it be a continuous process, then it becomes bearable, and it just gets built into the DNA of the firm. Everyone understands that compliance is a full-time job for everybody.
It's a little bit like eating an elephant a bite at a time, because it is an elephant. And what we all try to do is make that elephant manageable, but it's still an elephant. So I've just popped in here. I wanted to ask how many of you wear, excuse me, just the CCO hat? That's pretty impressive. That's actually really surprising for a firm that self-defines as a smaller advisor. The assistant director for the Fort Worth office of the SEC has said publicly, repeatedly, that he believes any firm that has $1 billion or more in assets under management should have a full-time CCO. So that's sort of a gauge. So how many of you are wearing more than 2 hats, one of which is the CCO? Yeah, that's much more typical, much more typical. And of that group, how many of you have somebody else who can help you with compliance? So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So at least you've got 2 sets of eyes, at least 2 sets of eyes looking at things and all. So we work with investment advisors primarily in the Texas market. And we see firms using us very, very heavily, where we're coming in once a month for half a day and actually completing a lot of the compliance tasks, and others that we only see once a year. One of the pieces of material that we provided to you is our monthly task list, which is a combination of compliance tasks, reviewing the manual section at a time, conducting tests of each manual section, and then also pulling the documents that the SEC normally requests for that topic area, so that by the end of the year, you will have prepared yourself for the full SEC document request list if you would have a, quote, full exam, which they're saying they're really not doing today, but this way you're more prepared if you are being selected for a small exam, a more focused exam, and you have a sense of what kinds of documents they're going to be asking for on fees or on trading, whatever. Email reviews are something that we do for clients, but only if they complete a detailed questionnaire so we know what's been happening in the firm. So we do a range of things for clients, from only doing the annual review to actually conducting most of the compliance tasks.
Thank you. So we tried to figure out what would be the best way to give you some practical, very practical tips, and we picked a few topics that seem to be on everybody's radar screen now, and they're things that you've heard about already at the conference, and the first one is fees and fee calculations. As you probably know, there was a risk alert on this area last year. It is part of your materials. We have included that for you in case you haven't read it already. And I'd like to turn to Linda now to not necessarily walk us through the entire risk alert, but just walk us through the topic.
So we've heard a lot about, with the different people coming in from the SEC, about the fact that they're really focusing on fees. This is all part of the focus on retail investors and on the whole cost of investing. And we've been the beneficiary of a number of very deep fee exams that the SEC has conducted in the Fort Worth region. They initiated this, and it's then been rolled out as part of the national exam program. So how many of you in this room have multiple fee schedules? Okay, listen up. The biggest thing that the SEC is looking at is they're taking the agreement, the client agreement, and they're taking the invoice and they're comparing them. And what we've seen is many of our clients have been in business for 30 years, and they've acquired other firms. Partners have adjusted the fee schedule informally by email or just in handwritten notes somewhere, or even more likely with a handshake, if even that. So I highly, highly recommend that those of you with multiple fee schedules do some testing on your fees, and you want to compare your ADV, the investment advisory agreement, the invoice, and your manual to see that they all line up, because the expectation is that all of that syncs. And what we're also seeing is that the examiners are asking for much more detail than we've ever seen before in ADVs and investment advisory agreements. So one of the things you all should be looking at with what's changed in terms of ERISA law, the Seniors Safe Act, when was the last time you had an attorney look at your advisory agreement? Because it's probably, if it's been more than 3 years, you probably need, it's worth the money to have somebody look at it and then compare the new agreement to your old agreement and say, is it worth repapering all of our accounts? I know it's like making the elephant bigger rather than smaller, but it's going to pay off when you're examined. The kind of detail that they're looking for in the agreement and the ADV and the manual is, when do you charge the initial fee? When you calculate the fee on a pro rata basis, are you doing it on a 90-day quarter or a 92-day quarter, depending on how many days there actually are in the quarter? How do you handle flows? How quickly do you provide refunds if you're if they're prepaying you? So they're looking for much, much more detail than we charge in advance, here's our fee, we're done.
And I'd like to interject this moment that in 2016 we had a routine SEC audit. There were 3 things on our deficiency letter. 2 were so trivial, I don't remember what they were. The third one was, hey Dave, you've got clients governed by a 3-page advisory agreement that's 20 years old, that has nothing to do with your current business, and you have clients that were children when their parents hired you, and now they're in their 20s and 30s with no advisory agreement. And I go, that is actually a legitimate criticism. So we took a hard look at our advisory agreement for the first time in a decade and realized it was very inadequate. We threw it out. We started from scratch with a very good template and wrote it in plain English, treating it as a marketing document for our firm. And In that process, we consolidated our fee schedules down to 2. And then we set out the new advisory agreements, and in that process, raised the fees on half of our clients by 1/3. So you can go to your management and say, listen, if we do this, we can make compliance a profit center.
One last thing, they want an explanation about how you household accounts. You know, when you combine accounts, and so that if you have a tiered fee schedule and you combine all the family accounts in order to get them at a tier with a lower fee, how do you do that? How do you define what a household is? So just think about how you're doing this now, and how do you explain your billing process to your staff, and be prepared to have that really laid out in terms of, again, aligning the ADV, the agreement, your policies and procedures manual, and how things actually happen.
We have a question?
So the comment was the testing that should also include looking at the deductions that the custodian is making, because they were collapsing numbers and there was a nickel difference. And we have seen materiality is not an issue during these exams. We had questions about a 1 penny difference. 1 penny in $1.5 billion AUM advisor. And they were, you know, it's a little upsetting when this happens, but that's the way it is.
I'm working with a client who's being examined now, and fees are a very big part of this exam. And one of the things they've asked for is they picked one billing period. They want the calculations. They want the agreements showing the assets upon which the calculations were done. They've done asset verification with the custodians. But then they also asked for the account statement for the month that the fees were actually came out of the accounts. Correct. So they can make sure that what went out was exactly what was supposed to go out. The other thing in this exam, and that I'm totally understand, I'm fine with, where I'm getting a little bit, I don't want to say peeved. Challenged, is that this is a 2-person shop, and they had, during the review period, they had 2 client cancellations. And so they had to do refunds. And the contract and the ADV say it's prorated based on the number of days left in the period. We showed the math. Everything was fine. They don't have a special policy and procedure in their manual about how they do the math. And
yeah, it's
just
amazing.
leave it at that.
Yeah.
So this is very, very detailed, what they're looking at, what they're looking for. This exam is still going on, so I don't know if they're going to write us up for not writing up the refund.
Yeah,
math,
what we
but
see, these fee exams are like peeling an onion. You know, they keep going deeper and deeper, and they go on for months. Our record so far is a 14-month exam, but this was also a firm that had 82 fee schedules, 82. So it's something to just be aware of. Even if you just have 5, you want to check those, and then you want to be like Dave's firm and try to bring things to 2 fee schedules or less than 5, so that you're not, you know, scrambling.
Okay, so moving on to another topic which we've heard about repeatedly at this conference, and that is cybersecurity. Dave,
Yeah.
would you like to
So
tell us what
I was
you do?
on the panel for cybersecurity last year, not as a cybersecurity expert, but as a time-stressed, money-stressed executive who just needs to protect his firm. And oftentimes people have said to me, David, what is the minimum that the SEC requires to be satisfied? And I said, that's totally the wrong approach. If you don't protect your clients, if you don't protect your firm, you'll be out of business, and it doesn't matter what the SEC thinks.
Right.
So 5 years ago, we had no budget for cybersecurity. We had no budget for cloud computing. And in this past year, our budget for cybersecurity was 50 grand, and our budget for cloud computing was 50 grand. And I regard that as money well spent. The way we went about it was we brought in an outside expert, and by the way, you can't rely on your in-house IT. It has to be an outside expert who's looking at 50 firms, not one, and going to all the conferences to learn all the latest tricks. And I said, hey Raj, I don't have unlimited time or budget. What are the top 10 risks I need to worry about? Rank order them for me, and let's knock them off one after the other. And it took about a year, but now we have a very layered security protocol where each element is probably 99% secure, but when you have 4 layers of them, you're at 99.99999% secure. And the principle on cybersecurity is like the principle of the two joggers and the bear. Everybody know that story? Right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You don't have to be faster than the bear, just the jogger, right? Your buddy. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about being hacked, but we don't have annual cybersecurity training at my firm. Every time we get a really good-looking malware, phishing email, we just shout it out and shoot it around the firm. Right now, we're all getting emails about Squarespace billing. You need to update your Squarespace credentials. Well, we have a Squarespace website, but why should the whole firm be getting that email? I got a very well-crafted email this past week from a lawyer that I know well, from a law firm I know well, saying, hey David, go ahead and download these documents for the matter we've been discussing. I go, I'm not expecting that email. So I hovered over the link, and sure enough, it's to a website in Poland or someplace. So I called the law firm and said, hey, are you getting phone calls about this email? She goes, ugh, you're the 30th person today. So some bad person captured a routine email of this person, redrafted it slightly, and sent it out to her distribution. So when it comes to cybersecurity, it's not a one and done thing. It's a continuous conversation with your entire team from the moment they walk in the door. Mm-hmm. We had a summer intern last year. The very first conversation we had with her was about cybersecurity. All right. Now, if you do have a good cybersecurity regime in place, even if a bad person, even if malware does get in, there's other things in place that will probably block it from being an issue. But you train your team, hey, if you think something's wrong, shout it out immediately. Because oftentimes, if we act quickly, we can block problems before they get worse. We know that if our primary server gets infected with ransomware, we can roll over to our backup server, which is in a different state, in a different server on a different electrical grid, because we test it annually. We know that's the case, right? And then the other piece that comes into our annual compliance review is that once a year we have a roundtable phone conversation with our cloud team, which is in Pennsylvania, our cybersecurity team, which is in Forest Hills, our compliance consultant, which is in San Diego, and us. And we're on the phone for an hour, and we talk about what have we not thought of since last year that we should implement. And a couple new things come out every place, and then we go ahead and implement it, and then we document that, and we put it in our compliance folder. So in 2016, I was dying for the SEC to grill me about cybersecurity so I could kind of run out the clock, a little bit in that 6-week time frame, and they didn't ask a single question. And I think it's because they have no idea what cybersecurity is right now. They don't have the expertise.
That's our experience as well with recent exams. The biggest surprise has been with all this talk about cybersecurity, no questions were asked. I mean, it was just shocking.
Well, actually, let's ask the audience. Has anybody been examined on cybersecurity?
2. 3.
So what did they ask?
Encryption.
Of
I'm
firm
repeating.
owned- yeah.
Firewalls, training, PII, how secure it is.
Okay, and where's your firm based? And same firm? Chicago. Okay.
Now, are those SEC exams or are those internal exams that you have done by an outside contractor?
So they were both SEC. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yes. I just finished a limited scope exam 2 weeks ago, and there was not a question or anything on that.
So you just had a limited scope exam. What was your exam on? It took a year.
Not that limited.
I got the request when I was here last year. I finished it 2 weeks ago. Just general stuff, just your standard information. They did actually ask for a phone call, and they grilled me on my background. I'm like 3 p.m. But it was sort of bizarre. You know, they wanted to see our policies and procedures, our annual checklist, and they asked for the 2018. I told them I haven't had time to do it because I've been dealing with the exam. But, I mean, it came back with really nothing on it.
So bottom line, just because the SEC is not asking doesn't mean you don't take it deadly serious.
Well, and I think David's point is completely correct in that this is a business issue, and it's more important than what the SEC is looking for, because this can kill the company. If you get hacked completely, it can kill the company. So it makes sense to just pay attention to this. And I loved that. I think it was Cohen this morning who said, just have a plan. Have a plan. And one of the things that we have found to be really helpful in training is to bring in our own IT firm and say, okay, I've seen the map with all the arrows about where the hackers are coming from between Russia and Ukraine and China and Iran. What do I do? What do we do if, please no, I've clicked on an attachment and I shouldn't have? What do I do? Do I turn off my machine? Do I unplug it? Do I call the help desk? What do I do? And we had just a 15-minute conversation about what things could look like and what to do. And what our IT firm did was they put a big red button on each of our desktops and laptops that says shutdown. And he said, that's what you do. You hit the shutdown button immediately, then you call. But just to go through the basics, what do you do if? And have tabletop conversations about what do you do if, because that's when people get really engaged.
Well, and I think yesterday's lunch was very good, the special agent from the FBI, and I hope everybody took down the website he kept saying, and I was looking for it and I can't find it. IC3.com. Hit the shutdown button. .gov.com is a fake address. I wanted to see if you were paying attention. And so, yeah, hit the shutdown button, call your internal or external help, and then I think this really is something with calling the government. I think one of the good points he made yesterday was even if you've lost only $5,000, that's $5,000 from you, and if he's doing it to 1 million people or 100,000 people, that adds up.
The other thing to keep in mind, we've been talking about cybersecurity and the hacking and so on, but remember some of the most commonplace risks to your firm are emails that you may get requesting wire transfers, money movement. We had an incident where we had talked with one of our clients. He had a home down in Florida, and he told us, I'm going to be doing a lot of renovations on my home, and so on and so forth. Well, lo and behold, about 2 months later, I get an email, and attached to it is an invoice. And it's from a contractor who had the name of the client, the address. It was an actual invoice with all of his business information. It said, this is for adding the balcony to your bedroom, putting the skylight in the kitchen, the items that this client had told me that they were doing. And had a price there and said, here's the account where you can just directly send the money. Well, our inside processes say when you get anything in writing, you have to get on the phone with the client at the phone number that you have within your files, not the one that was provided within the email. We did that. I said to the client, I said, hey, when you get done with that balcony on your bedroom, I want to be out there having a glass of wine with you and your wife, And he said, he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, it was a pretty expensive balcony. He had no idea, okay, that I had gotten that invoice. It was the name of the contractor, okay, but he added a couple of pieces of information and says, that is fraud.
And the FBI guy yesterday explained exactly how they do that.
And he said that is fraud. So by us making that phone call, we saved the transfer of $35,000 out of this client's account, which would have gone to, an account at JP Morgan down in Florida. One other one, we got a wire transfer a request that said, can you send $50,000 to this account in California? It was a third party, they gave the name. The signature in the email was an exact match to the client's signature that we have on record. I knew the signature immediately. When we then looked up who it was going to, the last name on it was Rodriguez, but instead of being ended with a Z, it ended with an S. I actually went online and looked up, there was a person at that name, at that address, with that name, but the difference was the last letter of the last name. And it wound up to be fraudulent. We called the client, they said, we don't know who that person is. And that was a $50,000 wire transfer. So keep in mind that something may not be as sophisticated as the hacking, et cetera, but it is coming to you at different, in different forms. And if you have good policies in place that are constantly reinforced, you can prevent financial loss to your firm.
Yeah.
One last thought on cyber is how many of you have had, your company has reserved all domain names that have anything that look like or look similar to your company name? So that's something you really, it just is a smart thing to do. We had a client whose, the client firm name was put on a fake website, and it took months to get the website down. And they, instead of Inc., it was put on the website as LLC. It looked like a completely legitimate website, and it was collecting money in order to, help people get back some tax refunds that had been found. So it was clearly kind of a weird deal, illegal, but it's smart to just go back to your company, go to your IT folks, and it's not expensive to buy those domains, and it's just another kind of insurance for you all.
Okay, now we're going to move on to another topic, and again, it's one we just heard about a little bit in the last panel, and that is electronic messaging and social media. And you heard on the last panel, this calls to mind your obligations under the record-keeping rule. And we've heard a little bit yesterday about all of these old rules that are being looked at by the SEC to bring them up into modern times. And one of the rules that we didn't hear about was record-keeping. That's also an old rule. But the record-keeping rule you heard today, 2042A7, which requires you to keep records of communications, A11, which is any kind of advertising. It doesn't have to be to 10 people. I think they changed it to even if it's given to one. Mm-hmm. And the other thing to look at in the record-keeping rule is 2042G, which was very modern when it was added to the record-keeping rule, because it talks about electronic storage, including microfiche and microfilm. It tells you what you have to do and the special things you have to do, including maintaining a duplicate set of materials separate from the original. So that's all very interesting, and I'm not quite sure how that jibes with cloud storage. Another thing in the record-keeping rule is you have to keep the records generally for 5 years. For the first 2 years, you have to keep them in an office of the advisor. Well, is the cloud an office of the advisor? Is a remote server an office of the advisor? We have a little bit of guidance, and even though we're not supposed to take too much out of the guidance anymore, there is a no-action letter from 1995. And in that letter, the SEC staff said keeping something in the office of the advisor means that you have essentially immediate access to the document. So if you have essentially immediate access, the fact that it's stored in the cloud or stored on a third-party server is not fatal. But we look at this, we look at some of the other compliance rules, and then we look at the risk alert that they talked about in the last session, and a copy of that risk alert is in your materials. And then you say, gosh golly gee whiz, what do we do for electronic messaging and social media? And we'd like to hear from Sharon on that.
Thanks, Marianne. As we know, electronic media, messaging and social media is becoming so much more commonplace. Smaller advisors like us may look at it and say, gee, wow, I want to compete with everybody out there. I want to get on Facebook. I want to get on Twitter. I want to get on this. But they may be afraid to use it because of the compliance that's required around it. Now, we all assess, like with anything, when we're going to use it, we assess the risks, we assess the processes that need to be put in place. So I'm not going to go into any of that. OC has given it the risk alert. It's in your handout, so I want to tell you just go and look at that. And latitude is given very much to every firm to develop their own policy based upon your business initiatives and your own needs. So when you look at this, do it according to what you feel you need to do within your firm. But each firm really needs to decide what method you're going to use and what platform are you going to use. Are you going to allow texting? Are you going to allow, instant messaging, chatting, or is it purely email? What platform will you use? Facebook? Will you use, Twitter or LinkedIn? And when you do, after that analysis is done, how do you ensure that you are complying? I've broken it down to say, first define what it is that you want to do. What is allowed, what is not allowed? In our firm, as an example, electronic messaging, we are not allowed to use texting. Why? Well, we have chosen an archive system that does not capture texting. Therefore, it cannot comply to the books and records. So therefore, we do not allow it. Texting can be used for, confirming a lunch, a meeting, canceling a meeting, giving directions, etc. If inadvertently it is used, the employees know that they need to either forward that text message to their business email address. This way it is now captured as part of the archiving system.
I think that's a bad idea.
In what respect, Lynn?
Well, so I'm being a little bit difficult here.
Okay.
Because I think to expect somebody to remember to text to an email is wishful thinking.
Right.
And I think this is where we're all behind in the compliance world. I was very surprised to see this morning that when they polled about does your firm allow texting and no hands went up. I think that's an indication of, excuse the A word, but age of people in compliance, that it's like, no, we can't do that, it's not that necessary. As we have younger and younger people that are doing only texting and not using email at all, I think we're just, we're fooling ourselves. So one of the things, just a quick second, one of the things that, I think there are decisions that have to be made at the company level on, there is going to come a time when texting has to be allowed. Mm-hmm. That means having it archived. Do you provide a second phone? That's a business phone. There was a day, it wasn't that long ago, when people would carry a BlackBerry and a phone. There's an ability to bifurcate a phone and have two numbers on a phone so that you could give people a business number to which they can text. And you're going to ask me for the name, and I don't remember. I'm sorry. It's that A word again. But I think it's something that you really have to look at, because I think that's one of the things that is making it difficult for younger marketing people to be able to market effectively to their own generation. You had a comment, sir.
It was more of a comment just following on what Sharon was saying. One of the things that one of our affiliates had a client that was exactly as you described, only wanted to text. And there are applications that are out there. Our affiliate found an application that was a pretty reasonable price. It was like a small monthly fee. But essentially what this application does, it sets it up so that the person texts essentially to your business phone. The text gets caught from this app, and at the end of the day, the app automatically sends an email with all of your day's text content to your email box, so it all gets caught in your direct.
Well, what if you don't have a business phone, though? There are a lot of us in here that smaller firms will not pay for a separate phone for you, and so you're using your personal phone.
How many, let's take a show of hands, how many people allow their staff to use personal phones? Okay,
That's a lot.
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
If I can just make peace here with, this gentleman said that there is a service that will capture the texts that come through the phone and take them, and at the end of the day, archive them and download them into one email that presumably can go to compliance with all that day's texts.
Do you know the name of that app? Great, thank
Okay.
you.
That would be great. You'll text, he's going to text it to us. That would be great.
Actually, I have just a couple of things. Based on what Sharon said, I do have clients that say, we say that our people are not allowed to text other than logistical information. They can't text substance. However, you can't control the clients, and the clients are more and more wanting to text,
Absolutely.
including with the A word. I was told a very elderly client that did not use email but texted.
Yeah.
And what we had said for this client or for this company was that when the employee replied to the client on the text to include the company. So it was in a response, it wasn't copying something you had done, it was responding and making sure the CCO was on it. With the idea of capturing all of the texts and then turning them over to the compliance department, is anyone concerned with now you are capturing people's personal texts and turning them over to compliance?
My team would riot if I captured their personal texts.
But that's why
Well,
we're
how do you-
suggesting bifurcating it.
Right.
I think you have to do that, because you don't want to see
So
all
we
that.
forbid them to use their phones for anything other than logistics. And when we do have clients that start to go down there, we say, hey, listen, we've got compliance issues. Can we move this conversation to email? Now, we know that our millennial clients are pushing us in that direction. So now we're investigating apps where the client is sending a text and we're responding back, but it's not from a phone. It's actually from a web-based application that looks like text. So there's going to be some interesting resolutions about this over the next 2 years, just as there was with email 10 years ago.
Right. Were you going to say something?
So the comment was that you can bifurcate with a separate phone number. The challenge is if you have clients who are friends or clients who become friends who have your personal number, it's really hard to switch them over. But so I think this is, this is a story that's going to go on for quite some time. But I think it's something that, we haven't really talked about otherwise in this conference. And I think we really need to pay attention to this and figure out what makes sense and explore and teach one another what's working and what isn't working.
Well, for all the folks who said that people use personal phones, how many bifurcate phone numbers? So for the rest, either you're left with a very unhappy choice of capturing all the personal emails, which you're right, the employees will riot, and you don't want to, believe me, you don't want to read.
Right, yeah.
No good can come of your knowing too many things about your employees' personal lives. Yes?
So you've been talking about Mr. Edwards and home about logistically, we can text a client, hey, we have a meeting, you're not going to be late, stuff like that. But what specifically would you have to capture? Is it like trades? Is it flows? Is it recommendations?
Yeah.
All of that.
You would know that.
That's where you have to go back to the record-keeping rule.
If a client said, hey, David, I want to change the asset allocation to 70-30, blah, 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 whoa, that comes off text immediately. Or, hey, David, can you sell this fund and buy that fund? Whoa, that comes off text immediately.
Or can you move this kind of money to my account? No, immediately. Anything that has to do with execution of movement of money, of trades, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
well, it's not, see, the record-keeping rule for brokers is you have to keep everything relating to your business as such. For the Advisors Act, it picks out specific, and of course, this is what makes it difficult, and we, as David said, we addressed this with email 10 years ago. I don't want to have to go through and figure out, is this an email I have to keep or an email I don't, so people started keeping all the emails. but anything substantive that goes to the actual portfolio management. Now, there has to be a certain amount of discipline.
That was my point.
Yeah, it's difficult.
That was my point.
Well, I just tell my team, if you start using your phone for business, I will just start putting monitoring software on your phone and problem solved. Before we exit the social media thing, I just want to make a comment that you have to capture every change to your website, every change to your Facebook page, Twitter.
That I was going to cover next is the content. We actually have a dedicated marketing person who, for our social media platforms, such as Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, anything that gets posted to our website, to those platforms, she's the person who uploads it and puts it on there. None of us can go to those platforms and post. And that is to make sure that the content that's put up there has been pre-cleared, that the appropriate disclaimers are on anything that is put up there, and that we keep in mind the testimonial rules. No endorsements are allowed on our LinkedIn page, as an example. Okay, so therefore she is also responsible for keeping track of any changes that are made to the website and keeping the archive of whatever is put up there from the standpoint of content. Now, a lot of our content also, because it gets sent out to our clients via email, it is also then archived in our email system. Any economic and market commentary. It may be that one of our advisors was reached out to by a local newspaper publication to opine on 529 plans or anything in the business space, and that is then all sent out to our clients, but it's also captured then in the email system.
And my only addition is we don't manually archive the changes to the website or the Twitter feed or the Instagram or YouTube. We actually use a service of Smarsh that captures all that stuff automatically so that we can just scan through it at will and provide it to the SEC at will.
And I have seen in exams questions of show us every iteration of your website during the review period. So,
Thanks.
Is there a question?
Yeah, so we have a millennial advisor, and she has recently, and I'm working on this with my compliance attorney right now, she has recently put up a Yelp page. And so I would love to know your input on that because we're scrapping.
Okay, in your handouts, you'll see that there is an electronic messaging and social media policy that each. You want to know when somebody is creating a Yelp page or any other kind of social media platform.
And she knows that, no testimonials,
right, and they are aware of everything that has to be there. As I was saying, in your handout, you'll find that there is a template for social media and electronic messaging platforms, and it is something that we use internally, so you can take it and you can use it as appropriate for your organization. But part of what we do, and it goes back to training, all right? We do training right from the get-go when somebody walks in our door. Okay, when the new hire comes on board, they are given a compliance packet. And in that compliance packet is given, here's our personal trading, here's our conflict of interest, our privacy, our ethics. The other piece of it is our electronic messaging and social media policy. Okay, so we let them know the do's and the don'ts, because how do they know what they're doing correctly or not? The second thing is that we get from them their personal sites that they may be on. Just, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. We ask that they come and get pre-cleared through compliance anytime they are going to set up a new social media site, such as a Yelp, a blog, or whatever. Now, we do not ask for passwords, so we're not invading their privacy, but part of our testing may be to go onto their page and just look to see what is it that they are putting up there. So we know that all they can put up there is the name of where they work. They can like something that may have come out from our company page, but to make sure that there's no endorsements, they're not doing any solicitation of, business, they're not recommending any kind of stocks or anything like that. So, and we have them sign on that as soon as they come on board. So you're setting the tone right from the top that this is what we expect of anybody using electronic communications in any way, shape, or form. We then annually have an attestation to say, yes, I understand that this is still the policy in place and that we are going to acknowledge, accept it, and they understand the consequences. Not only do they get that packet, we in compliance will set like a half-hour meeting with them to sit down and review so that we can ask pointed questions. Am I allowed to do this? Can I do this? And if not, why? And we can then explain to them the guidance that and the restrictions that we're under from the regulators.
Okay, we have a question over there. Comment. And what he was saying is that he deals with an attestation, uses attestations for the supervised persons to say they've complied with the social media and electronic messaging, but instead of just saying I've complied with the policy, he specifically itemizes what that policy is.
Yeah.
I have not texted, I have not, and actually fold your policy into the attestation, so to give it a little more oomph. But at the end of the day, and he drew the analogy to the access person in personal trading records, if you have a rogue employee that is going to deliberately circumvent and do an end run, there's only so much you can do, and attestations are fine. But Sharon raised the point where she doesn't ask for passwords. You have to be very careful because there are labor law restrictions and state employment law restrictions. You cannot generally request passwords. You can't do it when somebody applies for a job. You can't say, show me your social media password so we can see if we want you to hire you. You can't require people to friend you or let you follow them or come for dinner or whatever it is you do on social media. And so you're somewhat caught between a rock and a hard place because you have to respect the employee's privacy, but yet you are responsible for taking reasonable steps. So I like the idea of making the attestation a little more targeted and tailored.
We have 2 more questions.
Did I just hear you say there's a prohibition on saving passwords for employees?
Of requiring the employees to provide you with their personal password. So if they have a personal account, when the whole idea of monitoring this first came up, some compliance folks were saying, well, okay, if you want to use this social media, you have to give me the password so I can go in and see what you're doing. And I don't remember whether it was an EEOC issue or a state issue, but there are labor concerns, so if you want to do that, please consult with your labor counsel.
Does that apply to the business computers and systems as well?
No, if they're business, no.
No, we're talking about
personal. It's personal.
Right.
You mentioned archiving the different forms of a website and documenting those changes. For a private equity firm, if you have investments that also have their own websites, does that trickle down to those, or is it just the website of the RIA?
I believe it's only where you control the content. So where you have the say as to what goes up on that website, you're responsible for that.
So the question was, if you're a private equity firm and the companies in which you're investing have their own websites, are you required to keep those iterations of those websites? And the answer is no.
And we have 18 seconds. So we're going to move on to exams.
Can I throw out one more comment?
Well, we're not going
about
to get to exams.
Yelp and Google reviews?
Okay.
So Yelp and Google reviews are a very dangerous place to be right now. 3 firms were censored and fined last year because they had actively solicited reviews. They'd hired a social media firm. Yeah. My firm has more Google reviews than any other firm in New York City. And those Google reviews were put out there by our clients who happen to like us a lot. And I've got my fingers crossed that the SEC says, David, did you ask for these reviews to be put there? Right? Because if that is the case, that's considered to be a testimonial. So if your new advisor is emailing clients saying, hey, could you put the nice things about me on Yelp? Did she do that already?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so that's, right. So already that's a compliance fail, and probably she should shut that Yelp page down.
Okay, so we're standing between these folks and lunch. If you have additional questions or thoughts, you can certainly approach us afterwards, but we will say class dismissed.
Thank you very much. All very good questions.